Communism, a word that means many different things to many different people. A removed observer might comment that is the political philosophy centered around the idea that all property belongs to the state, though it is distributed to the masses based on individual needs. A card-carrying member of a Marxist group might find communism agreeable for the sake of equity of society. But an entrepreneur, an inventor, a pioneer might find communism to be a concerted effort to stifle the reason for their occupation. All Marxist systems share commonality. All restrict one's right to ownership over property. This restriction of rights through forced collectivism harms innovation in such Marxist nations. Its effects are exemplified perfectly by the progression of communist China and the society portrayed by Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. China's venture into communism was rocky at best and disastrous at worst. For the purposes of a focused examination, the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution movements will be the closest to be examined. Following the Chinese Revolution of 1949, Mao Zedong assumed power as the chairman of the Communist Party. From this position of power, he launched his Great Leap Forward program, a movement that attempted to industrialize China to transform from an agrarian economy to a socialized industrial one. The result was disastrous. In rural areas, communes were set up to force farmers to collectivize their efforts for the state. Prior to this collectivization, most farmers farmed to feed their family, with a little surplus to be sold. Within these communes, however, farmers were forced to supply the communist state with the fruits of their labor. The inefficiency of the government's rationing led it to actually export agricultural products instead of feeding its own citizens. The end result was a starvation of approximately 35 million, with several million executed or tortured for the forbidden act of attempting to grow food for themselves. Therefore, the Great Leap Forward demolished rights for the individual as it forced dependence on the oppressive government for sustenance. Such oppression contributed to the stagnation of innovation, as there was no motivation for individual effort to contribute. All rewards would be confiscated and poorly distributed. A similarly sinister form of forced dependence can be observed in Atlas Shrugged. With the economy plummeting, the government becomes increasingly commanding over the economy, similar to the communist ideal of a command economy. Dependent on looting the riches of the producers, the government attempts to appease its looters by conducting raids on the captains of industry still left. Francisco de Acuña, a copper magnate, saw his copper shipments sunken as the government attempted to extract loot. Similarly, Hank Reardon, a pioneer in steel forging technologies, was forced to sign over a quantity of his steel at gunpoint. The government's dependence on the producers to provide for its parasitic pundits is similar to the way communist China was dependent on its farmers to sustain its economic movement. The seizing of any resources produced by the producers in each society, be it the Chinese peasants or the captains of industry, de-incentivizes innovation. Any production beyond the mediocre would be given to others. The Cultural Revolution of China was a combination of the familiar economic failures of the Great Leap Forward, as well as new cultural revisions to China that encouraged collectivism. When the communism's tenets came into play in China, intellectual property was threatened on an unprecedented level, and to this day is still in a state of purgatory. According to the Regulation on Awards and Inventions, which was implemented in China on November 3rd, 1963, all inventions are property of the state, and no person or unit may claim monopoly over them. All units throughout the country, including collectively owned units, may make use of the inventions essential to them. Eerily similar to that order was the one present in Atlas Shrugged. Attempting to fix the economy by collectivizing innovation, the government implemented Directive 10289, which stated all patents and copyrights pertaining to any devices, inventions, formulas, processes, and works of any nature whatsoever shall be turned over to the nation as a patriotic emergency gift by means of gift certificates to be signed voluntarily by the owners of all such patents, copyrights. The protection of patents and intellectual property are fundamental to preserving innovation in a nation. Otherwise, theft of old ideas to turn an easy profit becomes more prevalent than innovating for profit. Such is the case in modern communist China, where international patent laws are disregarded almost entirely. The Chinese market is flooded with copies of foreign products, producing without having innovated. For instance, a plant was discovered in China to have illicitly produced CDs with Windows OS. When Microsoft sued, they earned a paltry sum of $240, almost as though the plant owners were being protected by the state's courts. Thus, the lack of appreciation of property rights in the form of patents leads to theft of foreign ideas, stifling domestic ones. Atlas Shrugged has a similar situation in which the states assist in the thefts of one's intellectual property. Hank Rearden, the aforementioned pioneer in steel, is forced to give up his steel patent to the government. In doing so, he signs over his claim to fame, his advantage over his steel-producing competitors. Just like how the seizure of physical property drops the incentive for innovation, so too does the seizure of intellectual property. Communist China and the government from Atlas Shrugged share a remarkable similarity in their approaches to property rights. They completely disregard them. For that reason, their societies have suffered greatly. The Great Leap of Mao's China collectivized agricultural production, and it led to stagnation as millions starved without incentives to boost production from innovation. The looting from the producers in Atlas Shrugged disincentivized the producers from producing and led them to dropping out of society, leading to further economic turmoil. The loss of intellectual property too followed the same pattern, as theft was incentivized while innovation was disincentivized. Marxism, in all of its forms, requires a sacrifice of property rights. If a state should want this sacrifice, they had better be prepared to suffer the consequences of stagnation and a sluggish, unoriginal economy.